we do, like the psalmist, long to come together and be present with one another and unite our voices and lift them up in praise and adoration to our God. He's deserving of it, and certainly this is one way in which we can do that. Please remember those who are away and keep them in our daily prayers. As we begin this morning, I want to invite your thoughtful attention to several New Testament scriptures. Now, I recognize you guys are discerning listeners, and I believe you to be seasoned students of God's Word. And so I'm confident that you will readily recognize the common theme that all of these verses share. All right, here they go. First one, 1 Corinthians 16, verse 14. This is the English Standard Version. Let all that you do be done in love. Second one is Ephesians 5 and verse 2. And walk in love, as Christ also loved us, and hath given himself for us an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling savor. Third one is Colossians chapter 3 and verse 14. Again, the ESV rendering. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And the last one, 1 Peter 4 and verse 8. And above all things, have fervent love for one another, for love will cover a multitude of sins. Again, you discovered the common message, right? In each of those New Testament exhortations to Christians. I think we might well say in summary, these inspired injunctions call upon Christians to major in love. Major in love. Again, thinking back on a few of those, Ephesians 5 and verse 2, we are told that we are to love, that love is to be the sphere in which Christians walk. And that figurative expression, walk, friends, that defines a person's life. It's a very comprehensive term. In fact, Vines, in his expository dictionary of New Testament words, he says concerning that word walk, it signifies, quote, the whole round of activities of an individual life. Friends, a Christian's life is to be walked in the realm of love. But then again, think about Colossians 3:14 and also 1 Peter 4 and verse 8, and think about how love is to take a supreme position among all of the divinely directed responsibilities that we as Christians are to act on. And why? Well, as explained in those verses, because of love's inherent qualities. But then, I want you to think especially about the all-encompassing scope of that first exhortation that we read. 1 Corinthians 16 and verse 14, listen to it again. Let all that you do be done in love. Ricky, there's nothing that falls outside those parameters. Let all that you do. Brother Howard Winters, commenting on that verse, I think well remarks. He says, quote, all the affairs of life, whether in matters of faith or matters indifferent, whether in worship, in the home, at work, or in recreation, they should be transacted by the principle of love. End of quote. Well, hopefully, hearing those exhortations that centered in love, it's no surprise to you that it would be among the points to ponder to remain productive. This has been the series of sermons that we've been engaged in over the past several weeks. And again, by way of review, what we're talking about is remaining productive, that is, consistently, more actively engaged in the works that God has ordained for us to be walking in as members of the body of Christ, as His workmanship, the church, Ephesians 2 and verse 10. And again, all we're trying to do is to enumerate some points to ponder. That is, some things that we can reflect on, things that we can think about every day that should help us to remain productive in those good works. Now, last week, we made the observation that these points to ponder, friends, they're really synonymous with motives. Motives that we as Christians should be able to think about each day and meditate upon and find in them compelling reasons to remain productive in those good works that God has ordained for us to be doing. Now, hopefully, and I believe you do, but hopefully we do recognize the great value of motivations when it comes to good works. At least remaining productive in those good works. Again, consistently, more actively engaged in them. As I stated throughout this series, friends, I'm not in any way suggesting we don't know as Christians that we are to be living lives of labor. I'm not in any way thinking that you don't recognize that our lives as Christians are to be lives filled with good works. But if you're anything like I am, sometimes you need encouragement. I know it, but every once in a while, again, life gets in the way. Every once in a while, I need a motivation. I need something that's going to stimulate me, something that's going to cause me to go to work, to act, to be incentivized to be productive in those works that I know I'm to be doing. That speaks to motivation. That speaks to motivation. Tracy, I remembered a book that I had authored by Brother James Toll, and it's entitled Good Works. It's actually one in a series of workbooks that he had authored. But obviously, in this workbook, he is addressing the topic of good works thoroughly. And I just thought it was noteworthy. Of the 13 chapters comprising his workbook, he devotes 3 of those 13 chapters to motivation. He certainly recognizes the need for us to think about motivation when it comes to good works. But then, especially as it relates to our current point, one of those 3 chapters is entirely devoted to the motivation of love. Love. In fact, I want you to listen to what he says pertaining to that motivation. Quote, "It is in love that we find the highest motivation for good works." I say, Brother Toll, amen. I believe that is where we're going to find the highest motivation for good works. And so last week, we introduced love as one of those points for us to ponder, as one of those motivations for us to remain productive. We did that under this heading, proof of our love. Now, I think all of you were here, and so you hopefully remember that in that introductory lesson last week, we gave a great deal of attention to the love, the nature of the love, of which we particularly are referring in this point. Again, the Greek language has several terms that we would translate by our English word love. But the one that I am asking us to direct our attention to is agape love or agape love. And by the way, Angie, all of those New Testament exhortations that we referenced at the outset of today's lesson, guess what word they had for love? It's this one, agape, or a form of that word. All of those, 1 Corinthians 16:14, Ephesians 5:2, Colossians 3:14, 1 Peter 4 and verse 8, those exhortations were for us as Christians were to give special attention to this agape love in governing our lives. And so, as we considered last week, this love, agape, is the love that we learn exclusively from God. He is its origin. He is the very essence of it. And so if we are to know what agape love is, ultimately we have to look to God. And that lofty love, secondly, we discovered, is more than an emotion, because it is a love of the will, which means it can be and is commanded by God, even as we saw in those 4 exhortations. In fact, that's the word that Jesus used when He commands us as His disciples to love our enemies. So again, it doesn't always go according to our natural inclinations. It's a choice. In fact, agape love will only be exercised by those who choose to do it. We also pointed out from passages documenting Jesus' teaching, as well as that of other inspired writers, of how comprehensive agape love is as a motivation. Because we observed in their teachings that all of God's commandments, all of them, will be obeyed when we practice this love, agape love. That's how comprehensive it is as a motivation. If you possess and practice this love toward God and toward man, that's the motivation that will find you doing all that God commands of us. And then finally, we offered this as a practical definition of this sublime God-like love. Friends, agape love is that love that seeks the highest good of another, which in turn then finds that person prompted to act in promoting that good, listen to it, at whatever cost, whatever sacrifice that might demand. I read this quote from Brother Woods, and I thought it well captures this definition of agape. He said, quote, "The willingness to give what one has, even his life, for the sake of others, that is the essence of true love." That's agape love. And so, when we concluded last week, we were asking some questions that might be prompted by my using this word proof. Now you can see it kind of goes along with the alliteration, but it was more thought through than just the P. And so we were considering some questions that might be prompted by proof of our love. Questions like, number 1, do we need to prove our love? A second question we asked was, is that even Bible terminology? Is that something we read about in the Bible? And then thirdly, well, how does this proof of our love, how does that serve as a motivation for our remaining productive in good works as Christians? And so I want to at least this morning to begin answering some of those questions that hopefully will give us reason to ponder, give us reason to reflect about and to think about on a regular basis. All right, so what about that first question? Do we need to prove our love? I would say yes. And the first reason I would offer is because of the nature of this love. The nature of this love. Friends, Vines, again in the Expository Dictionary of New Testament Words, he comments on the verb agapeo. So here's love as a verb. Here's what he says, quote, "Love can be known only from the actions it prompts." Did you grasp that? He says, as a lexicographer, he says agape love can be known only from the actions that it prompts. And again, I ask you to reflect on that definition that we gave for agape. Agape describes that love which seeks the highest good of another, now watch, and then prompts one to act in promoting that good at whatever cost, whatever sacrifice that might demand. Friends, the very definition of agape attests to its nature. Friends, agape is a love which can be shown to exist and to be real, that is genuine and sincere only by the actions that it prompts one to do. Those actions, we could say, are good works. good works, because we're seeking the highest good of another. And so, friends, these actions of goodwill or good work, they are the evidence, they are the proof that agape love even exists in a person. And so in this respect, Ricky, in this respect, agape love is a lot like faith. It's a lot like faith. Do you remember what James said about faith in the absence of works? Remember that? James chapter 2 and verse 17, it reads this way, faith, if it has not works, is dead, right? Being alone. Now, in the following verse, James offers this insightful observation. Listen to this. He goes, yea, a man may say, you have faith, I have works. Show me your faith without your works, I will show thee my faith by my works. Do you understand the challenge? Now, James is depicting two people, and this one person says, I have faith. And the other one says, well, prove your faith without works. How would you do that? How would you give evidence that you trust God, that you believe God without works? The other one says, I have works, and I can prove to you that I have faith by the works that I do. By those acts of obedience that demonstrate my trust, my confidence, my faith in God. And so, friends, professing to have faith, James says it can only be proven true by the works that it produces. But here especially is what I found interesting. If you back up in James chapter 2, listen to the illustration that James uses to show this inseparable connection between faith and works. He's going to paint a scenario. It goes like this. If a brother or sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, notwithstanding, you give them not those things which are needful to the body, what does it profit? Now, we all understand that scenario, right? If somebody came to us and said, and it might be obvious, they were without food, they were without clothing or without housing, whatever it is, and we say, well, I wish you well, and don't help them. James' question is, how did that help them? How did that good wish, how did those sweet platitudes, how did that benefit the person who was in need? The answer is, it didn't. It's a rhetorical question. It didn't profit them at all. Look at the very next verse. Even so, in the same way, faith, if it doesn't have works, is dead. Again, professing that you have faith, it can only be proven true by works that it produces. Now, that's faith, right? But let's turn our attention to love, agape love. And here's why I found that interesting connect between James and John. Remember, John is often referred to as the apostle of love because he frequently addresses this subject, not only in his gospel, but also in his letters that were written to individuals. So in 1 John, let me invite your attention. Look at 1 John, because now we turn from faith in James to love, agape love, in the writings of John. Because John is going to offer a very similar scenario when he is talking about agape love, to show this inseparable connection between love and good works. Look at it. Look at 1 John chapter 3, and let me invite your attention to verse 17. But whoso hath this world's good, and sees his brother have need, and shuts up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwells the love of God in him? Do you see the parallel? James talked about an individual who was destitute of food, clothing, and they come to you looking for help, and you say, well, wish you well, and you don't do anything for them. And so here is John now talking about agape love, and he says, if you see somebody who is in need and you have those things to supply those needs and you don't supply them, how can you claim to have the love of God in you? In fact, look at the following exhortation then, an injunction, verse 18. My little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and in truth. Obviously, this is an ellipsis in grammar. You have to supply the word only. My little children, let us not love in word only, neither in tongue alone. We have to understand, John is not prohibiting here our expressing love for one another. The point is, he is explaining that to state it, to say that you have it with words, with your tongue, and then not prove that it's true by works, he says it's meaningless. More than that, the rhetorical question in the previous verse says that if you don't help that brother or sister, in essence, you are denying that you have the love of God in you. Look at that rhetorical question. He says, how dwells the love of God in you? In other words, it can't. It's an impossibility. Friends, when you profess love for someone and then you simply wish them well, when they have some need that you can alleviate, when you simply say, well, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, John is saying that's futile. In the same way James said, to profess you have faith and then don't do this, it's a dead faith. John is saying, if you can help and you don't, you are denying. It's not only useless and meaningless for you to say, well, I love you dearly, but I'm not going to help you. John is saying it's impossible for that person to have the love of God. It's impossible for that person who would respond in this way to have agape love operating in your life. It's impossible. Why? Because of the nature of this love. Friends, the nature of agape love demands evidence that it exists. It demands proof that it is real. And you know what that evidence, you know what that proof is? Good works. That evidence, that proof is in a person doing what they can in seeking the highest good of the object of their love. You want to know how inherent this connection between love and good works is? You want to know how inherent it is? Even God abides by it. And please understand, God doesn't have to abide by anything other than His own nature. And that's why we can say He does abide by this. Because agape love is of this nature, and He is the very essence of agape love. But I want you to think about this. Think with me. John is going to say in the following chapter, 1 John 4, verse 8 and 16, God is love. He's the very essence of love. He is the very epitome of love. If you want to know agape love, look to God. All right, so that's who God is, and that's His relationship to love. But secondly, don't we also know that God can't lie? We know that, right? And so, for God to profess His love for man, which He does time and again, for God to do that, shouldn't that be satisfactory? If God is the essence of love, and God can't lie, then for God to say, I love you, shouldn't that be the end of the discussion? Shouldn't that be all that's needed? That's what we would reason, right? But listen to the Scriptures. Listen to them. Stay right there in 1 John. Look at 1 John chapter 3 and verse 16. Hereby perceive The word means know. Hereby know we the love of God, because He said it. Isn't that what we read? Hereby perceive we the love of God, because He stated it. Isn't that what it says? That's not what it says, is it? Hereby perceive we the love of God, because He laid down His life for us. Look again, 1 John chapter 4, look at verse 9. In this was manifested or revealed or made known the love of God toward us, because He said it. That's not what it says, does it? Because He stated it. Now that should be enough, knowing God. But it wasn't, because of the nature of agape love. In this was manifested the love of God toward us. How did God make it known to us? How did God prove it? How did God evidence that professed love for us? That God sent His only begotten Son into the world that we might live through Him. We reference Romans chapter 5 and verse 8 in our talk at the Lord's table. The King James reads this way, but God commendeth His love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. I want you to listen closely to the Christian Standard Bible's translation of that. Romans 5:8 in the Christian Standard Bible reads this way, but God proves His own love for us, in that while we were sinners, Christ died for us. What? God had to prove His love? When God can't lie? When God is the very essence of love? God still had to prove His love? Why? It's the nature of love. That's the only way we can know that it is real, that it exists. And so again, friends, the nature of agape love demands evidence. It demands proof that it even exists in a heart. But also that it is true and genuine and sincere and not hypocritical. And that proof, that evidence, is found in a person doing what they can in seeking the highest good of the object of their love. You know, Sister Tracy, a number of times as you read through the Gospels, you're going to encounter this kind of language. It's going to say of Jesus that He was moved with compassion. We hear that word compassion. I'm sure it relates to us, this idea of love. So here is Jesus, and He is going about, and He is witnessing people having needs of various sorts, and He is moved. Observing these individuals in their state of need, He is stirred inwardly. And what is stirring within Him? His love for these individuals, His desire for their well-being. So here is Jesus, the Son of God, and He's moved with compassion. But here's what I believe is significant. In each of those occasions where it is said that Jesus was moved with compassion, the inspired biographer is then going to immediately tell us of Jesus' actions to provide whatever promoted the well-being of those whom He saw, those who evoked this compassion in Him. One example of that is Mark 6 and verse 34. And Jesus, when He came out, saw much people and was moved with compassion toward them, because they were as sheep not having a shepherd. And He began to teach them many things. That is the nature of agape love. So friends, when I put up here proof of our love, it wasn't just for a P. I want us to understand the nature of agape love demands that we prove it. It demands evidence that it exists. And it is only in our good works, seeking the highest good of those for whom we have this chosen will or chosen love, that's the proof. That's the evidence. And that is so inherent in the nature of this love that even God complied with that. He proved his love. He evidenced his love for us, even though we would have no reason to doubt it because he can't lie. But he proved it. He evidenced it. How did he do it? By giving us his Son, by acting in a way that would meet our highest need. And our highest need was the salvation of our souls. And so, first question, do we really need to prove our love? Yes. Yes. If you understand this agape love, yes, that's what it demands. That's how you prove that it's real. That's how you prove that it actually even exists in our hearts. Well, we didn't get to the other questions. Lord willing, we will next week. But again, does the Bible substantiate this? Not only by our reasoning as we were, but can we find language like that in Scripture, proving our love? And then I want us to look at some of these notable connections between this motivation, love, and our proving that love by remaining, or in its motivation for us to remain productive. Hopefully those will, again, give us daily things to ponder, to think about. Because, again, maybe you're like me. I know what I'm supposed to be doing. But sometimes I need encouragement. Sometimes I need to hear that call to action. I need to be stimulated. And there's not always going to be somebody else around to do that for me. Some of that rests on me. And so I'm hopeful that these points to ponder will give us that very motivation that we need to keep us productive, to keep us active.